Your wisdom is free, brilliant and pure like the sunshine you be. The nature of truth you see and impart, a volume of prajna you hold at your heart. Clouded by ignorance and endless night, beings suffer cruelly from torment and fright. Entrapped in prison of samsara's guile, you love everyone like mother to child. With 60 toes, your rich voice resounds like roaring dragons and thunder it pounds. It pounds. Waking up from the anguish of sleep, you break the chains of the karma we reap. Your sword cuts swiftly the root of our pain, dispelling blindness we cling to in vain. Perfectly pure, with qualities rare, 10 bhumis traverse the conqueror's air. Adorned with 112 noble signs, you are the Buddha who constantly shines, lighting the darkness of mind here and now. Manjushri, to you I wholeheartedly bow. With 60 toes, your rich voice resounds like roaring dragons and thunder it pounds. It pounds. It pounds. It
Hello and welcome everybody to this session, Approaching the View. Welcome everybody. We have two very special guests with us for this event, Jakob and Elizabeth, both of whom are very
Hola,
long...
bienvenidos. Tenemos dos.
Oh, one of our translators is coming through.
Dos invitados especiales, Jakob y Elizabeth.
Fixed.
Thank you. Okay, I hope everyone can hear us properly. So Jakob and Elizabeth are both very long-term practitioners. I think, actually, I was going to ask you both whether you met in, when you both met Khyentse Wangpo together. I was wondering whether you were both around at the same time in Kathmandu with His Holiness, or whether you met later.
We've sort of been on the circuit, right, together? I'm not quite sure when we met first. Elizabeth, you need to unmute.
We met in passing, I think, several times, but we only actually started getting to know each other in Australia, I don't know, about 8 years ago or something.
Yeah, in Auckland, in New Zealand, the Buddhist summer school.
Oh, it was in New Zealand, that's right. Yeah, yeah. But I was aware of your presence on this earth.
That was mutual.
Well, I feel the Khyentse Vision Project is incredibly lucky to have you both here, and I'm so grateful that you both agreed to do this event, especially with this wonderful text that our translator Sonam has translated, it being a presentation of the view in particular. And I know that both of you, your specialty is presenting the view in such a fresh and interesting way for modern Western practitioners. And so this is a really wonderful opportunity for those of us who want to develop a closer, more in-depth kind of relationship with this topic, to be able to have a way of approaching the topic in a more personal manner. So welcome to both of you. And I, without further ado, will hand over to you both to open the session. So thank you so much to everyone for coming, and welcome Elizabeth and Jakob.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us, Dolma. Elizabeth and I decided that we'll take turns. So I sort of, we flipped a coin and I'm supposed to be the first, say the first few things. So, well, first of all, this is a very auspicious day, this being the Tampe Duchen, or the day of the Buddha's birth. So on that sort of occasion, very happy that everybody's here. On a very sort of personal note, really, I have to say I've been witnessing, this is a couple of years ago, since I think it was just around this time that Dolma announced the beginning of the Khyentse Vision Project. I seem to remember we did something on Khyentse Wangpo's anniversary together. And I think everybody here is aware of how incredibly valuable this project is. So just want to honor the Khyentse Vision Project and the team of editors and so forth. In particular, also thank you to Sonam Jamtsho, who we're really happy that he's going to be here a bit later on, but he's done a remarkable work. It's an excellent translation as far as I can see, and also a really good forward. Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to thank the audience for being here. The subject matter is really important, and we're going to be trying to make a strong point about the value of exactly what the title indicates, the importance of the view. Now, of course, on behalf of myself, I should right away make a disclaimer. And I'd like to quote Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, who once at the beginning of a talk said that the audience should just regard him as somebody who's been exposed to the radiation of the teaching. And this is exactly what I am. I am just a sort of a lab rat that's been exposed to the brilliance of the Buddhist teaching. And the presentation that I am going to be coming with here is simply just going to be a reflection of just that. And in no way pretends to be doing fair, you could say, justice to the subject matter. But that's where it's really wonderful that we have Elizabeth here. Because Elizabeth has really, over the years, done a remarkable, great service to the modern community. And particularly, I've been very impressed with the way that Elizabeth has been presenting essential Buddhist insights like pratitya samutpada, dependent origination, and also her work with the Middle Way Initiative and the open question. In Siddhartha's Intent a few years ago, we had a study group of Elizabeth's Logic of Faith. And I have to say, this is a really valuable book because it actually bridges the logic of the sutra tradition with what we could say the inconceivable dimension of the mantra vehicle. So that's where I feel very reassured that Elizabeth is with us here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Are you finished, Jakob?
For the time being.
Okay. Well, thank you for your kind words. I also have to just say that I very much consider myself a student. And I feel that that's actually a very protected place. It keeps me curious. I'm curious, and that's what's needed for these teachings. And so I don't really pretend to be anything other than that, just incredibly, deeply curious with longing to understand what these teachings actually mean. And I also want to say, just to begin with, thank you to Zonzar Khyentse Rinpoche for his vast activity for Lopön Sonam Jamtsho, and also to Droma, and because she's so devoted to this Khyentse lineage. And thank you so much, for everything you do. And also to you, Jakob, because I find you very inspiring. I think the reason that we actually talk quite a bit. And we have another friend, Andy Carr, we're called the Gang of Three, and we love to talk about the view. And I think what we're really, truly interested in is we love the traditional Dharma, but we're also interested in, like, it's a living thing, and how do we bring it to life in ourselves? And what are the things that get in the way in terms of language? And, I have this one friend, she says, I'm a Dharma fundamentalist. I'm a Buddhist fundamentalist, which I find really funny. She's an excellent practitioner. But I always laugh because I know it's kind of tongue in cheek how she means this, but there's no such thing as a Buddhist fundamentalist. That's the point, is that Buddhism is meant to be based upon inquiry and openness and studenthood. And I find with Jakob, he's deeply respectful of the tradition, and yet there's this longing to explore. And, I often think of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who we both spent time with, and how, knowledgeable he was, but he's not, of course, pedantic or grasping at any kind of ideas, but completely open and involved and in awe of the nature of life and mind, and, had no sense of, it was almost like a studenthood, but a divine kind of studenthood. So I feel maybe, that being around these great masters has rubbed off on Jakob and hopefully a little bit on me. But anyways, I feel so inspired. And I also was just listening to Woolston's talks. I couldn't be there live, but he said, as kind of challenging as these teachings on middleway teachings can be, they can be quite tedious to engage. They can be quite challenging to the conceptual mind and many other things. But he said, these teachings are about our life. They're meant to be living a Dharma. So anyways, I'm so grateful to be speaking, have this opportunity to speak on approaching the view. And, the view is actually, seems to be the most underdeveloped aspect of people's practice in general. Maybe it's difficult. A lot of people have no idea that there even is a view. Some Buddhist practitioners I notice, it's like this new thing when you talk about it. Wow, I never even heard about this before, So when we're talking about the view, because view is, Jakob will explain that often views impede our understanding, our ability to see clearly. But here, when we're talking about the view, we're talking about the view of emptiness, or the view of the middle way, or the view of prajna paramita. We're talking about the wisdom aspect. So prajna paramita, if we were to describe her, because we often refer to her as the feminine principle, and that's, a whole other thing. But prajna paramita is the mind that sees emptiness. It's like the subjective awareness that sees accurately, or we could say the mind poised for insight into the nature of reality, or having an unmistaken relationship, that which has an unmistaken relationship to its object, that which comes before the awareness. So if you want to talk about unconfused subject and object, we're talking about the subject is prajna paramita and the object is emptiness. And then they're like this in union, that they're not one and they're not two, which is a very classic middle way understanding. So, when the characteristic, you could say, of prajna paramita is that which is free of grasping and rejection, or like the mind of an open question. So I like to use this term open question. It works for me so well, that when we ask an open question, we haven't shut down around a conclusion. And yet the mind is engaged and it's reading patterns, and it's in a place of studenthood, which is a very noble and protected place to abide for the mind. It's a very sane place to abide for the mind. So, when we are able to poise our mind in an accurate way, prajna, accurate discerning, we're accurately discerning, then we see things in an unobstructed way. It's kind of like, we say when we go to a hotel, I want a room with a view. You open the curtains and nothing obstructs it. that's what we mean by view here. And when I was thinking about view, when I think about view, I often bring to mind a quote from the Abhisamaya Lankara, which is really very simple and to the point in terms of describing the view and also describing what the practice is. And this quote it's very renowned, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, but it goes like this. Nothing to be added, not a single thing to be removed, and seeing things as they are, this is liberation. So I'll say it one more time because it's so profound. Nothing to be added, not a single thing to be removed, and seeing things as they are, this is liberation. So what this is really saying is that things that what we call the view or seeing accurately is just what happens when everything extraneous, everything that's in the way, falls away. So there's nothing missing or nothing that needs to be added. We're not contriving anything. It's just fresh seeing. So this aspect, when we're talking about emptiness or seeing emptiness, I often think we have so many assumptions or views that get in the way, that impede clear seeing. And I made a little list of assumptions that I've noted, I've observed in myself, and I observe in other people that get in the way because, Jakob and I talked, and this is we thought I'd open with just trying as much as possible to encourage people to get clear on the view. So we need to examine what gets in the way of us even feeling like we can understand it. So one of the assumptions I think people have is that the understanding prajna, paramita, or the teachings on emptiness or the middle way teachings are only for scholars. And it's true, they can be very cryptic and dry, and that can be inhibitive. But we need to find a way in. And I think there's a bridge sometimes that we need to make. And we're all trying to find the language and find ways, because in some ways, I actually think that these teachings can be taught simply, but we need to keep our mind really open. We have to start asking questions. It's like if you consider anything long enough, like if I hold this pen in front of me, my understanding of it is going to change. I might have thoughts about it. It will start to open up. And so I think even just asking an open question, like, how can I understand this? What is the relevance? And to allow something to occur. When you ask an open question, that life will respond to you. That's my understanding of it. And you get curious and you engage. So that's one thing, is that it's only for scholars. And I don't think so. I challenge that. And the next thing is that people fear emptiness, because when you hear the term emptiness, it sounds like a void, or, when we talk about analytical meditation, it almost sounds like we're reducing things to dust. So that's an assumption, because you can't reduce the phenomenal world to dust. It's impossible. It's too powerful. It arises through dependent origination, and it's you'll never be able, you don't have to worry that you're going to annihilate it through analysis. What we annihilate is really our misunderstandings about its actual nature. And then the third is that we're just lazy. We get lazy this takes work and it takes effort to understand. And then also, this is a really interesting one I notice. We often think, this notion of emptiness or things as they are beyond concept. Prajna paramita is gone beyond. It's beyond dualism or clinging to concepts. So then we think, well, beyond concept means we can't really know it, or we can't put words to it, or all of a sudden language is no longer useful, or and we then, in thinking this way, we keep our spirituality vague. If you know what I mean. Vague spirituality means this, Jakob said this yesterday, if you don't really look carefully at, the view is very precise. It's not just anything. It's unbelievably nuanced and specific. So as you study it, you process, you become processed. And this is very interesting because in the Sutrayana, the view is established through, point by point in the most, using the one's prajna and discerning intelligence. So it's a slower, gradual process. But if you look at, for example, in Chud practice or other practices like seed syllables, do the same thing as this process, like pet, it breaks apart. It's like a earth-shattering kaboom. That's, in a way, it's an analysis. It breaks apart the delusion. Or we talk about tekchud, that is to cut through. It's the same thing. It's just done in this kind of methodical, gorgeous, precise way. So, there's no trippy speak here. Like it's clarity. It's clarity, and it's opening up into something. So, I think we have some aggression toward what we consider conceptual mind or the intellect. But then we're aggressive toward that, then we're actually undermining our prajna, or natural intelligence, our discerning intelligence. So this is really, I feel this is so important. And then the last one also is really interesting. And then, Jakob, I'll give you the floor.
Please.
People struggle with this notion of transcendence nowadays. They struggle with the notion of emptiness and transcendence. Sometimes when I'll go somewhere to speak, I'll get in trouble for using these words, because transcendence nowadays is interpreted as spiritual bypassing. So when you use terms like gone beyond, like in the Heart Sutra, it makes it sound like you leave all the suffering behind and you just want to rest and abide in some spiritual, almost like a geographical place, and ignore the problems of the world that we're facing. And I think, well, this is not a path of turning away from suffering. It's much more sophisticated than that. This path begins with there is suffering. That's part of this path. And so all of these things, like I'm sure there's many more misunderstandings, what we call views that impede clarity, that impede the bigger view. All of these are misunderstandings. They're utterly, they're misunderstandings that come from dualistic mind, And so, it's very important to expose these views. Like, it's very important to look at what views get in the way of your own understanding. So, we just Jakob and I thought I could just begin with this, because we want to really encourage you and ourselves, always speaking to myself too, encourage myself to look to really understand the view, because this has to do with our life. And if you think about it, we move and live in the nature of emptiness. We are empty by nature. Everything is of the nature of emptiness. And so it's not something foreign or remote to us. Therefore, we're bound to, I think, and you can say what you think, Jakob, we are bound to experience it here and there, even just by default. The nature of emptiness. This is our nature. And so we need to look into this with the curiosity and humility, and even as kind of scholarly as these teachings sound, to study the middle way view should be devotional, because it opens us into really understanding who we are in the world we move about in, and how to navigate things with grace. And so anyways, this text is so potent and full of blessings, and boy, there's so much in it. And but it is our kind of, this is our work, is then we read these texts, we have access and we feel the blessings, but then what? What is our responsibility in approaching the view? This is, I guess, what we should be talking about today, and what we'll try to support that topic, right, Jakob? So you go now.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I really value this, because this is really also what I perceive as your great service to the Dharma, is really the application and the heart with which you present the subject matter. And like I was saying before, the work that you that you wrote, the logic of faith, really does such a tremendous service, because in presenting pratitya samutpada, you do succeed in introducing emptiness in a way that really is felt very much within the vernacular of, you could say, the ordinary modern person. But what you've also done there, which is really unusual, is really through introducing emptiness, also showing how when concepts fall away, there's a dimension of openness and what you refer to as grace that takes place, simply just wonder. And that, I would say, corresponds, and you touched on devotion. It touches a lot on what really is the entrance into the Vajrayana, the mantra teaching, on the basis of the rationality of the Pratitya Samutpada teachings. It opens up for this place of wonder and going beyond concepts that in the Vajrayana has a lot to do with devotion to the teacher and really experiencing that which lies beyond our ordinary conceptual mind. And that is where grace takes place. So that's where there's so much value in what you present, Elizabeth. So I'd like to thank you for that. Now, what I just am going to be doing here is just approach the text, a little bit talking about then the view as we've heard it and how it actually applies in this text. As always, I'm huge on foundational, you could say, considerations before one launches into the text. So I don't know if time will allow for it, but there's a few important points that I think need to be made. And first of all, we always need to, especially when we study philosophy, we need to understand that the Buddha and everything that comes from the Buddha in terms of insight comes from the Buddha's compassion. The Buddha did not teach to present a new brilliant, you could say, mystical experience. The Buddha just taught because he saw that we unnecessarily suffer. And that's where he taught out of compassion, not because he wanted to be a guru or he wanted to, make a great statement, but simply just because he could see that we suffer unnecessarily. Now, what is important in the Buddha's teaching is then, since it is about addressing suffering, and since he saw that suffering really comes from the way that we handle ourselves, and particularly our experience, what we come across in the Buddhist teaching is all about the mind and the key role that the mind has. In the modern world, we think, my suffering I won't suffer if I just get what I want, or I won't suffer if I'm comfortable, and so forth. And that sort of a continually indulging the craving mind is where the Buddha actually identifies suffering, or the cause of suffering. So that's where when we come across the Buddhist teaching, we come across something that is very verifiable, something that we can validate for ourselves. But it is a science that deals with the mind. And just the other day, I think many of us got an email from 84,000 about a new sutra. And in there, and this quote was sort of sitting in the email, and it was really sort of speaking about what we're talking about here, where it says, mind precedes phenomena. Phenomena appear due to the mind, and they disappear due to the mind. When one's mind is truly devoted, so will be one's speech and action in every way, always following the person like a shadow. Then one will find happiness. So that's where you could say the primary role of mind is really basic to Buddhist science. But it's always important when we come across Buddhism, we're not really, of course, Buddhism is, like Wollston Fletcher says, for better or for worse, it's labeled as religion. But it's not religion in the ordinary sense of the word. It is really, while it does deal with the things that we sometimes ascribe to religion because our materialist science simply doesn't have, you could say, the intangible dimension of experience as its scope, then it's labeled as religion, but it's really a science that is about what we can verify and what we can arrive at through reasoning. But you could say the focus of this science is the mind. So that's where we have something that is very, you could say, scientific or logical or rational in terms of our understanding, but the scope is the mind. And that's where we, in the Buddhist teaching, we say the mind can go into two places. It can go into confusion, what we call samsara, but it can also extract itself from confusion, which we then refer to as nirvana or enlightenment. But this process takes place in terms of what we do with our mind. So that's where we have to be proactive. It's not as if the Buddha can save us, or there's some sort of deterministic idea that sooner or later, on the basis of life after life, we learn more and more. You know, I think everyone knows that actually it's not really like that. I can say in my life, I have sometimes learned more, but then also even have to learn lessons. Then again, one falls for one's own stupidity. So there's no sort of deterministic notion that it's all just going to keep getting better. And that's where we have to be proactive. And what we need to, and that's where we, in the Buddhist teaching, have a path, is gradually diminish our confusion. And that's what we have in the Buddhist path. Now, the Buddhist path, of course, is vast. We can diminish confusion very much through our behavior, our lifestyle. We can diminish our confusion through calming the mind. But what we're going to talk about here today, and what this text that Sonam Jamtsho has translated, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo's earring of definitive meaning, is about, is actually discerning the nature of reality. And that's the scope of, like Elizabeth was saying before, the prajna paramita. And this is premised on us actually being proactive in terms of eliminating confusion, cultivating what we call prajna. Prajna being that which can cut through confusion, cut through deception. And that's where in the teachings that we have, and particularly the what we can call 4 tenet systems, in terms of the gradual path that arrives at understanding the nature of reality, then there is an increasing sharp critique with regards to the confused assumptions that we tend to subscribe to. And of course, what we have in the Buddhist teaching is an identification of where we go wrong, is that we fail to see this open dimension of reality. We sometimes refer to, like Elizabeth was saying, we talk about emptiness, but we should be careful with that word. But it really just refers to the fact that things don't exist the way we think they do. And in this text, we talk about the 4 tenets, which is a gradual approach to seeing more and more this nature. And again, this is not about us subscribing to what the Buddha said. Like the Buddha says everything is empty. Okay, it's empty. I'll believe you, you know. I like the Lama, and I like the feeling of, and I like all this karma and dharma business. Let's just subscribe to whatever they say. And that's where the Buddha insists. You know, the Buddha says, I can't bring you liberation. You know, I can show you the path, but liberation depends on your own efforts. And that's where we're encouraged to actually investigate our assumptions about reality. The good news about this, all of this, what comes from all of this, is not that we are learning a new, you could say, new truth. We're actually dismantling our assumptions. And a lot of us who grew up in the modern world, right, we came across the sort of the whole postmodern, you know, Jacques Derrida, deconstruction, and so on. But no, just recently I came across an Australian professor who actually identified how in the last years of Derrida's life, he actually highlighted how his deconstruction was really just intended to identify what lies beyond. And that's interesting. In his case, of course, he was Jewish, so it was God. But in this case, we're talking about the innate capacity for, you could say, the innate pure dimension of our being that is uncovered when we eliminate our confused assumptions about reality. But that's where we need to take a hard look at our assumptions. And so Sonam Jamtsho in his foreword, by the way, beautifully sort of highlights how this methodology of the tenets evolved in the Buddhist teaching. And it's really key for us being able to access a lot of profound teachings. But we talk about these four systems, the Vibhashika, Suchantika, Yogacharya, and finally Madhyamika, which are, you could say, increasingly profound ways of seeing this, or rather cutting through our assumptions about reality. But it's in, and unfortunately, I think there's not going to be time for that, but that is where we go through these four methods of analyzing reality, where actually the last one, Madhyamika, which is very beautiful, and that's what Elizabeth will sort of be taking us through a little bit, is actually opens up to this, what we call freedom from conceptual constructs. That the Buddha's job was not to equip us with new ideas, but to actually dismantle our assumptions. And that's where reality, you could say, it stands out. It's seen, not as a dogma, but simply just as a freedom from reference points. And this is what we then refer to as the middle way, where when we talk about the middle way, we're not talking about, the right way and the left way, but then, finally there's the middle way. But it really just means that the freedom from actually holding on, or you could say diminishing our reality into something conceptual. Now, this is very important, and when we're talking about the view, we need to have some appreciation of what we're doing. Otherwise, we just sit down and we can sort of calm our mind a bit. But unless we actually understand that this calm of mind is intended to facilitate a journey into something that is greater and that lies beyond our ordinary mind, this freedom from narrow-mindedness, or the judgmental mind, the dogmatic mind, the uptight mind. And that's where we need to have this view that really facilitates what we then call wider perspective, vipassana. I'm just going to, here at the end, I'm going to quote a very great Tibetan sage. It was the third Kamchol Rinpoche, Kunga Tenzin. And he said, no matter how good a meditation may be, if vipassana has not dawned, it is simply one of the worldly, non-Buddhist or common Buddhist meditations. It does not even qualify as a meditation of the Hinayana. So how could it possibly qualify as a meditation of Mahayana, Madhyamika, or especially Mahamudra? For this reason, it's important to earnestly practice vipassana. So vipassana is based on us having this view initially. Now, before I hand it over to Elizabeth, I was going to say we were thinking of reading through the text itself. Let's see if there's time for it. But other than that, then I would say we're really fortunate in just if Elizabeth would present some of her method in presenting this freedom from conceptual constructs. And I think if you unmute.
Yeah. You're going to have to help me too, Jakob.
Okay, I'm here. At your service.
Yeah, no, I'm just joking. I wanted to say something about, analytical meditation, which is the way we understand the view in this tradition. We're speaking from the middle way view. And as Jakob was saying, it's very important to challenge our unexamined assumptions we have about the way we see things and emerge from that, kind of the limitations of that. So the way we do that in the middle way tradition, as I was saying, is through analytical meditation. Doesn't that sound fun? Analytical meditation. When I first began to learn about analytical meditation, I remember thinking, what is that? And not being very attracted to it. And I think a lot of people are not attracted to that term or the idea of engaging that process because of some assumptions that they hold. For example, as I mentioned before, even the term analysis is problematic, especially in the context of spirituality, that we feel like we should be free from that, or free from the intellect. We associate it with kind of this dry intellectual process. So, one of the assumptions we might have is to reduce everything to dust. You're taking everything apart, you're dismantling it, and you're arriving at a place of kind of this like meaninglessness or void, or, kind of what we associate with when we hear the word emptiness. That it kind of squeezes the juice out of life or something like that. Then another kind of a problem with this term analysis that people have is that it actually creates too much complexity and information. So kind of the opposite. So, for example, you go to do an internet search, you look up one thing, and then you get so much information. Too much information, too many maybes, too many, you don't know what to do with all of it. So in a way that also dismantles meaning. It's like a relativism. You look at one thing and too many things come out, and then it loses its meaning yet again. So I think, analysis is a problem for people. And what I usually do when I run up against something that's uncomfortable, and I think this is a really important for we students to think about, is that when something's uncomfortable, you should start to look into it. And especially if it's a part of our tradition. Analysis is very important to this tradition. And maybe we're not looking at it in a way that's going to open it up into something that's beneficial. So I just went on, I remember looking through the dictionary. I had a big Oxford English dictionary, paper one, and I looked up the word analysis, and I saw the Greek root, and it said something really interesting to me. It said, I think ana means to take apart, but lysis means to loosen or set free. And just those words then got me very curious. And what I began to realize is that when we do an analysis, we're moving out of abstract ideas into a more direct relationship with life. It's like looking at something that seems singular or whole, and then realizing that it's full of nuance. It opens up into nuance. So, for example, I've often, when I talk about in this tradition, we're looking at, can we find anything that's singular or whole? Can we find anything that's permanent? And can we find anything that exists outside of the nature of causes and conditions, or condition reality, that's independent, that's not in relationship in any way? And of course, we're always looking and we're not finding. And when we look up a word, so we start with a word that seems singular or whole, it's like a map. And then when we begin to consider it, what it actually means, and engage in it, and look up the etymology or whatever, we see that the map we see the territory, not the map. So we're moving out of the map into the territory, which is a really interesting way to think about it, a very simple way. It's like I live here where I live up in the mountains. I live at the base of a trailhead into the mountains, and people come and they bring their map, but the map looks nothing like the territory. When you start walking the territory, you see, there's hiding places and shortcuts, and, you feel the breeze on your skin, and there's trees, so you're moving out of the map into the territory. And then whatever you look at is really actually a map. Like you look at a tree is a map for a series of interdependent relationships, branches and a trunk and pine cones. And so you're moving out of the map into the territory, and you keep looking, and it keeps opening. The more you look, the more it keeps opening. And in this tradition, then they will ask you to keep looking, like you look at a pine cone, and you can break it down into like an atom. You can, things are made of parts and smaller parts and smaller parts. Well, the word atom means it can't be broken. But in the 1950s, an atom was broken, and all kinds of theories came out of it, And so this is the thing, is as long as there's a thing and you can point at it and say what it is, it has parts, whether it's conscious or material. So we're always moving out of the map into the territory. And it's not like you ever reach some definitive thing. It just keeps opening. This is how the mind and how it relates to life is. This is analysis. It's like loosening or freeing itself from its abstract notions we have, like life bursts from the seams of our ideas that we cling to. And that's what this analysis is actually extremely exciting. So in a way, we just did an analysis because we looked at the word analysis and we started to open it up, and life became richer. And it didn't reduce our understanding of analysis to dust. It actually informed us and made our life more lively. We're not stuck, and we're moving, and we're connecting to life and relationship without getting stuck in the limited ideas that we have about things. So, the question really is for us. I always remind myself this: can I bear that much life? Like, can I bear not shutting down around ideas and allowing life to reveal itself to me? That's, in a way, that's kind of the spirit of the thing. That's the spirit of the thing. So anyway, I just wanted to say a short bit on analysis to maybe also, again, encourage you to look at analysis in a different way, because it was revolutionary for me. I ran up against this kind of not wanting to do analytical meditation and realizing if I want to understand Madhyamaka, I have to understand what it is I'm actually doing. We have to push against things that we don't understand and things that are uncomfortable. And then everything opens up. That's the spirit of it. So Jakob and I now are going to engage in an analysis with you. And often when I have done this in the past, we do a Zoom link and you see all the people, and then I get people, yelling out the answers and, engaging. But Jakob is going to be that person. And I know he's going to add so much to this. So I'm so excited to do it with him. So it's going to be an interactive exercise, but pretend I'll ask the questions. I have lots of questions. And even though Jakob is probably going to respond to those questions in a very intelligent way, I'm sure, an interesting way, you must ask yourself the questions. These questions are for you to ask yourself and to play with, and you just do it, quietly. I just want to introduce what we're about to do. So this is I'm going to be using these 3 sticks. I want you to be able to see them. And this is a way of opening up into an understanding of emptiness through the principle of pratitya-samutpada, or dependent arising. So it is through the understanding or using this notion of interdependence that we find our way into emptiness. And the great Nagarjuna said, dependent arising is emptiness. Emptiness is dependent arising. I think this particular analysis helps us understand what that means. So when we're talking about analytical meditation, it's the pratitya-samutpada, or the questioning that things are made of parts, looking for something that's not made of parts and seeing that everything is made out of parts, or seeing that everything is impermanent and why, or seeing that everything is in relationship, that's analysis. It's breaking things apart into relationships that we begin to understand emptiness. That's the analysis right there. And not only does it help us see the nature of the object is not intrinsic, but it poises our mind in that questioning place where we can actually see. So it puts our mind, it moves us a little bit closer to the intelligence. It brings out our prajna, because we're open questioning. We're not shutting down around an object. So it places us right where we need to be. And I just wanted to, it's the Buddha's birthday today, and I just want to say one little quote the Buddha said about this kind of essential quote that I'm sure you've heard about pratitya-samutpada, or dependent arising. He said, this is at the dawn of his awakening under the Bodhi tree, he said, "This being that becomes From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that becomes not. From the cessation of this, that ceases. So basically, I mean, this is all of the Buddhist teachings from the very foundational teachings till the end relate to this quote. And, you know, in the Madhyamaka teachings, it has to do with seeing that everything is conditioned. If the causes and conditions are there for something to happen, they will happen. If the causes and conditions for suffering are there will be suffering. If these conditions cease, there will be freedom, there'll be liberation, and the cause is the path, and so on. But another way to understand this is that everything is conditioned, and therefore it is empty. So we're going to get to what that is. But I want to give you an image before we start. In the sutras, the Buddha gave an image that goes along with this quote. And it is two bundles of reeds that are leaning up against each other. So the understanding is that this one is able to stand because it depends on this one. But when this one falls, this one will fall. So the idea is everything leans, everything is in relationship, and so in such an interpenetrating way that you actually cannot find where one thing ends and another begins, that it does away with this notion of intrinsic thingness. And that's what Jakob and I are going to try to illustrate through these sticks. And just one last thing is that, like, this stick exercise, I learned this from several teachers, Dzigo Kongtrul Rinpoche, I think Khyentse Sonam Jamtsho I saw do this, and Trungpa Rinpoche. And it was just like a few minutes that they asked me about the length of the stick and their relationship to each other. And then it was over. It's a very quick teaching, but it's very profound. And I just thought, okay, I could answer the questions, but I didn't really understand the implications of what this stick thing was. And I just pushed at it and pushed at it. I'm still pushing at it. 35 years later, I'm still pushing at it. Anyway, we'll push at it together, Jakob. But I'm not exactly sure where this originated, but once I asked Thupten Jinpa, the Dalai Lama's translator, where it came from, and he said maybe it came from a text of Chandrakirti, but he was very familiar with this. So anyway, I can't say for sure. So Jakob, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm a bit jealous because my teachers never gave me the stick introduction. The first time I saw this was Elizabeth presenting this in Sydney at the Rigpa Center. So, yeah, I'm prepared. I'm prepared.
Okay, good. You'll be so excellent at this. Okay, so the first thing is hopefully you could see the sticks, right, Jakob?
I can, yes. Okay. Yeah.
So now I'm just going to take this one.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you some questions about the characteristic of length of this. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, Jakob, what would you say? Is this a long stick or a short stick?
I would say this is a long stick.
A long stick. Okay.
It looks long to me. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what would you say?
It's not that long.
It's not that long. What made it?
Now it's a short stick.
Now it's a short stick.
Yeah.
What happened? Did this stick shrink?
Nothing whatsoever happened. But looking at the longer stick, then this stick that I thought was long is now the shorter stick. Yeah.
Very good, Jakob. Now what happens?
See, that's what I said. It's a longer stick. It's a long stick. Now that the short stick stands next to an even shorter stick, then it turns out to be the long stick.
I see. So can you say that it's long or short in and of itself?
No, I can't.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah.
That's the thing. So go ahead. Yeah. Say more.
Well, just before if it was my stick, I would have been very proud of having a long stick. But now it seems to not really stand out as having neither short nor long.
Do you think you could say that this stick doesn't have intrinsic characteristics from its own side?
Yes, in just those words.
Yeah. Or sometimes we say it doesn't have self-nature or self-characteristic,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have an intrinsic
Yeah.
characteristic. Okay. Very good. Yeah. So things find characteristics. We're using sticks, and we're using the characteristic of length, but we're going to expand this into other things as well. This is the nature of all things, right? Things find characteristic based on their relationship to other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can see how right away I sort of look at the object and I just sort of freeze it as being long or short. And then what happens here is I begin to discover that, in fact, it doesn't possess these, like you say, characteristics. Mm-hmm.
So now I want to ask you another question. So we've established that this doesn't have intrinsic characteristics, and yet does that render it dysfunctional? Can we still use it to compare or measure? I want to talk about measurement a little bit right now.
Totally. Yeah.
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 So do things have to have intrinsic characteristics or true characteristics in order to function?
Clearly not.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah. It doesn't have any characteristics as long as short, and yet it would function as, being 12 inches or 14 inches or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to put the stick down for now and just move this idea of measurement and comparing into a broader context. So, we use measurement. I until I started doing this, I didn't realize how much we measure things and what we measure. Like we measure the value of things by comparing things, right? I want to ask you, let's just brainstorm a little bit, because it's really great to get specific. What kind of things do we measure and compare in this way, as we've done with the sticks? Because I want to bring it out of the realm of just being about the length of sticks. So
yeah. Well, when I go to Denmark, I'm sort of a short guy, but if I go to Nepal, I'm sort of a tall guy. That sort of thing.
Yeah. So you compare.
Yes.
You can compare, and so you don't have an intrinsic height. Yeah. And we measure things like we measure. Okay, I always like this one. I'm sitting in my house and I'm looking at the corner, and the ceiling and two walls are coming together perfectly symmetrical, so my house doesn't collapse. Right. It's all been based on measurement, like the clothes we wear, the infrastructure that we move about on, like the civic infrastructure that we use. We're measuring time. What else are we measuring?
We measure time and space, length, height, and then time, Yeah.
So do you think time is an intrinsic truth, or is it just something we agree on?
Well, if we're bored, then time drags along. And if we're having fun, it goes very quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you talk to an international timekeeper, he or she will say that it's very difficult to keep the clocks ticking at the same time. We have an agreement, so it's an elegant tool, but it doesn't have some sort of intrinsic truth, right? Yeah. But it's an agreement that we have. So again, I want to ask you, do things have to be real or intrinsic to function?
It seems not.
Yeah.
It seems not. And that's where we can talk about measurements of time, of space, like you just did with the sticks. And yet, even though they don't have intrinsic value, conventionally, yes, we actually do talk about inches, and we talk about hours and minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. It might even be, if we look at the continuum of time, we might not even find, when we look directly, we might not find a moment or a unit of time, Anyway, yes. That's another contemplation, right?
Well, it's one of these mind-bending contemplations that you're just going to have to do it, because unless we actually go through with it, then it's going to remain vague. But that's where, yes, we look in the Madhyamika analysis, and that's where actually we have to say, while it functions conventionally, we cannot identify absolute value in neither time nor measurement of objects.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so true. And I think when we often hear this idea, like things, there's no characteristics, like in the Heart Sutra, it says the first on those list of no's is no characteristics. So people hear that and they think, oh, like void. But what it means is actually, why don't you describe? No characteristics means?
Well, it just means in the absolute. So, I mean, the prajna paramita teaching, interestingly, is just looking at the nature, the absolute nature of things. And that's where the Buddha was very provocative. And he didn't do this to sort of blow our minds, but really just because we suffer, because we attribute absolute values to things,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. If I stay in Denmark, I'm going to feel like I am a small guy. And then if I go to Nepal, I feel much better. And so on. So there is continually this sort of dismantling of any absolutes. And that's where the Buddha was so kind in pointing that out, I think, right?
Very kind and very true. And I wanted to give an example of how also in studying the tenet systems and the various ways of looking at things within the Buddhist context, how this what this does is it creates flexibility. It how do you say, it frees us into a flexible way of looking at the world and moving through the world, because we're not clinging to identities, things. Well, we'll get to that one in a minute. But I just want to tell a really quick story about when Kongtrul Rinpoche once was teaching at Gomde Center in California, and he was teaching on the 5th chapter of the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, which is the meditation chapter. And there's this particular piece of that chapter where he's speaking to the monks. Shantideva is speaking to the monks, and he's talking about, they're dismantling or kind of looking at the impurity of a woman's body. Of course, if it were a nun, then they could, whatever sex one is attracted to, in order to reduce clinging. They talk about how impure the body is. And they say when the body is animated, you can't wait to run over and kind of grab it and give it a kiss or whatever. But when you look at it as a heap of bones and blood and, lymph and all of this, when it's a corpse, then of course, most people are not attracted to that. And so just pointing out the irony of it, and it's very humorous. So it's a Vajrayana center. So there were some Vajrayana students there, and they were getting more and more uptight because they're thinking, the body is made of the elements, which are the 5 wisdoms and, pure perception and this whole thing. And they were they weren't able to kind of laugh and look at, well, actually, it's very hard to argue with Shantideva, what he was saying, because
he's very sharp.
He just knows how to, get at your weak points, and expose our kind of misunderstandings or the way we cling to things. So they were clinging to the view that everything is pure. So they weren't laughing. They weren't able to laugh and see the humor and irony of what he was saying. And it was really interesting because, of course, in the ultimate way, everything is empty luminosity. But when you start to cling to a view, you lose your flexibility, and then you lose the view altogether, because you might be clinging to the highest view, but then you don't have the ability to look at things in their own context and understand that characteristics don't exist intrinsically in the object. So it's like we look at our gurus, our teachers, and the mind is so flexible and able to accommodate. It's so sophisticated, And so I think, because you were talking about tenet systems and all of that, it's the same thing. Like each in its own context, we can look and we can understand that, well, it all depends. Everything leans. And so it makes the mind more sophisticated. And that's what we mean by the bigger view, instead of clinging to views. Even the highest Vajrayana view
Well, Elizabeth, you often quote Nagarjuna, who says, "I bow to the one who's gone beyond all views," right? Yeah.
The Buddha. He's talking about the
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So when in that quote, the view is the clinging to views. I prostrate to one who.
Hey, should we bring in Sonam at this point? I'm just wondering, just because it's a little bit over time.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of clear. I think in some way, first of all, you've really sort of how do you say emphasized the value of analysis and of and of the middle way. I just think at this point maybe we should just
we could stop here. We could stop here. There's much more to the analysis, but
there's a lot about this.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's so much that can be said. It's hard to just speak in such a short time about the view, but I love to hear what he says as well as a translator.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Sonamla. Pusu Zombo.
Yeah. I don't have much to say. I would like to thank Dolma for being this inspiring person behind the whole project, and also extend my gratitude to everyone at KVP, and also thank you both, Elizabeth and Jakob, for this very beautiful and inspiring presentation and teaching. Obviously, this translation is a result of collaboration. My name is given, but there are editors, reviewers who all work and put effort to make this at least a readable work. Maybe I will just talk about some of the reason that, in a way, led me to choose to translate this work. First reason is obviously because of my background coming from Shedra, and particularly in the text, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo quotes on more than 2 occasions from Sakyapentita and Gorampa. And again, because of my background, I happen to have limited kind of a degree of familiarity with the works of these 2 outstanding Tibetan scholars. So this is one of the reasons why I choose to translate it. And another reason is that if you look carefully into this text, and when you compare with other writings of Khyentse Wangpo on view, then I think one could cautiously say that in this text, he really seems to be talking and formulating his own position rather than repeating or kind of drawing from other texts. So this is also one of the reasons that kind of led me to choose and translate this work. And in terms of genre, one could really think of the text either as a Dumta, as a toxographical text, or as a Dilen. Dumta, I think it's more famous. Dilen might be quite obscure, but if you look into any of these, the collected works of Tibetan masters, then there is always a corner or a section where they compile the so-called Dilen. These are mainly the queries, kind of answer to the queries that has been sent to them by their contemporary, their disciples. It could be on a very deep philosophical topics, or on a very practical matters. So, and then the teacher will answer. So one could really think and then contextualize this text within the literature, the Tibetan Buddhist literature, as either belonging to the genre of Dumta or of Dilen. But we don't really know who sent this question to Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, and I think further research is needed. For example, in many cases, the questions are either integrated within the answer or either preserved separately. But in the Kabum of Khyentse Wangpo, it's not separated. I mean, preserved. The question is not preserved separately, neither integrated into this answer. So we don't really know. But from the circumstantial evidences and like the content and then the citation made, not only from Gorampa and Sapen, but also from some of the very important fundamental tantric root texts that plays a fundamental role in Sakya tradition, one could really think that the one who sent him those questions are someone who is from Sakya tradition, or someone who is very, very interested in the Sakya tradition. So, and then in terms of the content, this text, albeit it's kind of a relatively short brevity, it really discussed on some of the most important and kind of a difficult philosophical topics within the Buddhist tradition that Tibetan has inherited and that they have further developed. Like many of other works by Khyentse Wangpo, it's a very, very well organized work, providing initially a wider background by fleshing out some of the silent tenets of different Buddhist schools of India, like the Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, how, for example, each one in a way transcends the before one, while at the same time the initial one is seen as a stepping stone towards the higher view. So and then in a way the hierarchy of view seems to be determined by the kind of extension and intensity of their understanding of the no self or the Anatman doctrine or teaching. Also, very important kind of a topic that is discussed in this text is the Lamde teaching, the central teaching with the Sakya tradition, and comparing Lamde with, for example, other very important Tibetan teaching tradition like Shentong, the other emptiness, likewise comparing it with the Dzogchen, also with the Uma. So in a way, again, despite its brevity, it really gives us some sort of a nouns presentation about these different teachings and different and important living tradition. At the end, there's a very nice advice. It ends by gently reminding and in a way warning us about the limitation of study. And Khyentse Wangpo says, and he advised that it is important. He emphasized the importance of the meditative cultivation in order to really integrate and understand the view. So he's saying that although the study is very important, contemplation is important, but eventually, in order to make sense of the view and for the view to speak us on an individual and on a lived experience as to produce some sort of a transformation, he says that cultivating, meditating on the view in a secluded space is very important. And then I would like to say something about the difficulties that I face. As I mentioned earlier, it is very brief text in terms of its length, but the content is so rich, so much is packed in this short text. It assumes, for example, a huge knowledge about literature, traditions, philosophies. So that's also quite difficult when you have so much in such a little space. And then also, as we know, the text itself is written in a verse, and when author is writing in a verse, it necessitates him to be quite economical with words. And when the source text is quite economical and brief, it becomes difficult to translate it in the target language. And then also additional difficulty for a person like me is I have to translate in a language that is neither my mother tongue nor my native tongue. So English, and in this case. So yeah, this is what I would like to on the text.
Sunamala, thank you so much for doing this. It's a magnificent job. I'd like to see the chöke of this, but it looks wonderful. And also I see in the footnotes that you worked on you wrote a paper on the Gorampa, which also would be really interesting to read.
Yes, it's my master. I did a master work on Gorampa's work on Tomsun.
Okay.
On the 3 Tri-Sambhara.
I have a question for you later, Sunam, but we should probably let other people ask you some questions first.
So, Jakob, I actually have a question from a member of the audience, a person called Chris Redfield. Mm-hmm. And this question, I think, is directed at all 3 of you. So perhaps each person could have a comment on it. But the question is, how do I distinguish between my prajna and my assumptions?
Great question.
Listen to what the Buddha has to say about this. Because the Buddha will take you straight, will bring you to face your assumptions, and to challenge your assumptions. And that which challenges your assumptions, that is prajna.
So Namla, do you want to answer?
No, I don't really have an answer. Maybe like I just want to share some comments from Kadampa Master. They say, "Tamga gi chok changtok but phoba." So the supreme instruction is one that lays your own shortcomings, and if that perspective really kind of shows your own shortcomings to yourself, then maybe that is a prajna.
Maybe I'll just add that those wonderful responses. I sometimes when I really appreciate this question because it makes me look at the entire path and the value of the entire path. So when we look at the foundational teachings, we have all these vows and precepts. And sometimes from a higher point of view, it's like, why do we need those? And, we arrive at emptiness. And why do we need to look so closely at cause and effect if everything is empty? But this goes to show the deep, deep importance of the nature of cause and effect, of course, reflected in that the Buddha's quote, this being that becomes, that the way karma works and the way the conditional world works, everything matters. Everything we do matters. And I often think, okay, we have these like the 10 virtuous and non-virtuous actions. And they seem very constricted. And it's really easy to say, oh, I can take the vow of not harming beings. That's easy. I never harm beings. And then we take the vow, and then we have to start to reflect, and we begin to refine and see that, in fact, we harm beings just by virtue of being alive, that we're part of the equation of suffering. And it's very important to see how much we do cause harm, even inadvertently, but also sometimes just, due to our own ignorance. And so we become more aware, and then we become more aware of how that affects us and how it affects others. And so we also recognize we're part of the equation of benefit and how to remedy things. And the whole path is about refining our understanding of who we are in relationship to the world. And so this is really this whole path is about cultivating prajna. But I do think that this question kind of points us to the foundational teachings and how important vows and precepts are, and how important it is to look at cause and effect, particularly how we bring this all into the Mahayana. And when it comes into the Mahayana, rather than saying that there's good and bad or intrinsic, we look at motivation. And motivation becomes very important, because sometimes it's hard to say what's good and bad, but we do have to then take total responsibility for our motivation, and so on. And so I think it's an excellent question that we all have to ask. Critical question is, how do we tell? And then we gain confidence and we gain clarity in the difference, and we can feel it. It becomes quite more and more obvious when we're doing something that's coming from our clarity or coming from something unexamined. That's what the whole path is for.
So we have another question coming. This is a bit more of a longer question, so let me read this out to you guys. Many great masters emphasize the need to stabilize the definitive view until it is uninterrupted and unwavering. On the relative level, this allows for the moment of dying to be reliably seized as an opportunity for deepening and expanding one's realization of the view for the benefit of all beings. For each of you, in your recent experience, what are you most careful about, or perhaps even worried about, or extra sensitive to, that might disrupt your confidence in the view during such destabilizing moments like the moment of death? So I get
destabilized. I get destabilized every second moment. So I'm seriously worried.
So there was another bit of that question that was, what then helps you regain confidence in the view?
I missed a little bit of the question. Like I didn't hear the part about death. Could you just read that little piece? Like,
Sure. So many great masters emphasize the need to stabilize the view until it's uninterrupted and unwavering. So I think what they're asking is, on a relative level, at the moment of death can either be an opportunity to really test that view, but also it can be an opportunity to disrupt confidence in the view. So what I guess disrupts your confidence in the view the most, and what gives you the most confidence in the view?
I'll just say very briefly, what gives confidence in the view is mindfulness, continually coming back to the practice. So that's what gives confidence. And when that confidence is lost, then coming back to the practice is what reestablishes confidence.
mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting question. The view is, when we say stabilize the view, we're not like holding anything together. We're actually seeing through the appearances, or ultimately we take everything as an opportunity. No, ultimately we see everything as empty appearance or mere appearance. But at the very least, we take it all as an opportunity. And I think, I guess for me, this is very personal. When things arise that are difficult, I always think that everything is, an opportunity. Like you see it as the teacher. You see it as a way to develop or evolve. I always come back to that as a way of having a way of keeping my confidence. And also there's just the confidence of knowing, like you're looking and not finding, you're looking for something intrinsic, you're looking for something permanent, you're looking for something and you're never finding it. So you start to familiarize yourself, at least conceptually, with that view, that it's not real as you think it is. Like we think things are real because we experience them or we can touch them, like they're solid. But actually here, real means that it exists intrinsically outside the nature of causes and conditions. So once you've kind of gained confidence that isn't so, it gives you a lot of confidence. So you come back to the view in that way. And then through meditation, which is gom, meaning to familiarize yourself, you're always familiarizing yourself with this ability to bear not shutting down around the phenomena. So you have to have a conceptual view and then a meditative view that you cultivate through the 3 prajnas of hearing, contemplation, and meditation. You just keep coming back to that. And that's our job as students, to do that.
Sonamla, did you have anything else that you would like to add to that?
No.
Sonamla is being Manjushri here. Perfect.
Another question has just come through. Is the realization of the view the beginning of the path, or is it the whole path itself?
We would say that first we need to establish the view with certainty. But it depends how we approach this, because the view can be that the result lies far, far away, but according to some vehicles, and then other views is introducing, you could say, the reality right now, and then that is, you could say the experience is present within the view. So this is a little bit the difference between the view as we have it in the sutra teachings and the view as we have it in the mantra teachings. But we definitely would say that for us to have something to familiarize ourselves with, which, as Elizabeth was saying, that is the meaning of meditation, we first need to have certainty about what are we doing? Where are we going? And that's what the view That's what the view is.
So Namla, do you want to say?
Maybe I can give you the shorter answers. For example, in the classical presentation of the path, and let's take the example of the Mahayana path, and the moment one give rise to bodhicitta or one takes the bodhisattva vow, then at that moment you are starting the path. And it does not necessarily mean that you have already gained some familiarity with the view or anything like this. Of course, one can imagine a scenario where someone is already familiarized with the teaching of Anatman and Pratissamutpada and then give rise to bodhicitta. But usually it is the bodhicitta that seems, at least within the parameter of the Mahayana, where one can say that the path actually begins.
I might just add just a little thing to that. And that is, from the very beginning of the path. And I guess when I say, excuse me, the path, I'm always thinking in terms of the three yanas more, the gradual path is the Buddha as it's been presented to us, that even from the very, very beginning of the path, when we're introduced to there is suffering, that is a disruption of our confusion. So we're already establishing the path, and it disrupts this assumption that we have that the world is responsible for our well-being. Just that very, there is suffering, is a very powerful, actually one of the more powerful statements, I think. But so whatever disrupts confusion, that's the establishment of the view. It's the wearing away of what obstructs it. And that's starts from the very beginning to the end. So that's how I would respond to that.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you so much, all three of you. I think we're running out of time, but I think there's time for one more question. Perhaps you might be able to say something during your path, especially in the beginning of the path. What is your advice in terms of combining resting and analytical meditation during a meditation session? So what would be the best approach, especially as a beginner on the path, to approach analysis of the view?
Jakob. I would rest first and then allow the questioning to come from kind of a more relaxed mind. Because it will remind you that this is about something a lot deeper than just trying to figure something out, It's a very freeing process. And I think, like, for me, over the years, I've become to just enjoy analytical meditation to the point where, when you begin to analyze something, it might be conceptual at first. And of course, when you're studying a text, it's a whole other thing. It's so rigorous and often very tedious, but it's powerful thing to do. So in a certain way, there is the way you do it in a daily way where you just, maybe what I'm talking about is being able to contemplate the Dharma, like being able to look at something and let it open up and reveal itself to you in a bigger, more meaningful way, rather than kind of being caught in abstract concepts. But I think meditation, it's just important to do meditation, even intersperse it or just begin with that. So you remember what you're doing.
Jakob Leschly.
Lopön.
I have nothing to add per se.
So it's how does analytical and settling meditation interact, or what to emphasize for a beginner? Yeah.
I'll read the question in entirety. It's a question that's coming from a Brazilian member of the audience. So during your path, especially in the beginning, how did you or what's your advice around combining resting and analytical meditation in a meditation session? Would you advise more resting and shorter analysis, or more time doing analysis and resting less, or both? Do you have any advice for me or us?
It depends a little bit about the tradition, because in some traditions we emphasize a lot settling meditation, and analytical meditation is sort of done more at the time of simply studying. That's where you clarify the view, that's where you analyze. And that's how I personally have, for myself, what was very much practice was analyzing, not particularly just on the cushion, but in life situations, and continually applying the teaching throughout, you could say, experience, in meditation for sure, but also in ordinary life. And that's where you could say educating oneself is very valuable. I came to the Buddhist teaching and there was a lot of confusion trying to understand what is the Buddha saying, because it's so different from what we've learned in school, right? So that's where initially the whole analytical apparatus is very important. I remember once Khyentse Vision Project, he said, the highest value of theory is that it will give you great faith. Because it's there that you begin to sort of cut through your uncertainty. I was very fortunate in the beginning of my path. In my hometown, there was a lot of enthusiasm around Vajrayana and a lot of confusion around Vajrayana. And luckily, there was some people who were students of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and they did sitting meditation. So very early, I was exposed to simply sitting. And that sitting meditation that's taught in what was the Vajradhatu and the Shambhala tradition is essentially what we in Tibetan call jogom, or settling meditation. And I found that very helpful in terms of just enabling experience, because otherwise with the Buddhist teaching, we can have a lot of thinking, and to familiarize oneself with simply sitting practice, what we sometimes little bit sort of chauvinistically just say, oh yeah, that's just shamatha. But actually, when we in the Nyingma and Kagyu tradition talk about shamatha, it's very often the instructions are infused with vipassana. There's, even though the big words are not there, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and so on, the instructions that we get for meditation very much comes with the spirit of these great, you could say, systems of vipassana, or these great views. So personally, I found, I should say really the combination of the two, to continually be in a process of reflecting and more, you could say, integrating a perspective that understands the teaching, and also sitting. And sitting as in literally just sitting and allowing the mind to calm down. I think very important. So my answer, the short answer is combining the two.
So Nimla, did you have anything to add to that? So I think that is all we have time for with this session, but I want to take a moment just to thank all three of you so much. Sonamla, especially for your beautiful translation, and also for agreeing to help us with this project. We're so fortunate to have somebody with the kind of knowledge and background of study that you have, and all of your experience. It really is an incredible asset to the project to have you involved. So I am very grateful for your advice. Just in case people don't know, Sonamla is not only an in-house translator for us, but he's also one of our Himalayan scholars and expert traditional scholars, which means that he answers a lot of questions all the time from all of our translators and editors. And he really provides a lot of help to people who are working on the text, both in-house and externally. So we're very, very lucky to have him and very grateful. So thank you so much, Sonamla, for your text, for the translation, and also for agreeing to be part of this event. And Elizabeth and Jakob, As always, thank you so much, both of you. It really is a pleasure for me always to hear both of you discuss the view, really. I think that inspiring passion for the view, in particular amongst practitioners, and helping it to become something that's a topic that people have enthusiasm for and can really relate to and really use and approach in a very practical manner is just so priceless. And you both really breathe life into this topic in a way that is much needed. And I, for one, love listening to both of you talk about this topic, really. So I'm so grateful. And I want to particularly let people know that Elizabeth has some amazing podcasts that she does. There's one called the Open Question podcast, which I encourage you to check out. And she also has a project called the Middle Way Initiative. I think all of these links have been posted in the chat, both in YouTube and on this webinar Zoom. So please check out the links. And then there's also the Wilderness Dharma movement, which sounds like a wonderful initiative to support retreatants in the beautiful Colorado wilderness. So please check out Elizabeth's activities. And thank you both so much for agreeing to do this wonderful event on this special day. What a treat for us, for all of the audience, and what a treat for Khyentse Vision Project. We're honoured to have you. Thank you so much. And please, please come again. I'm sure we'll do more events like this.
Thank you, Dharma. It's been a joy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you both. And thanks very much also to the organisers, to Michael from Siddhartha's Intent, and to everybody else who has helped, and also to our interpreters whose job was very difficult, I imagine, during this. It's always hard to interpret when you've got fast discussion happening. So thank you so much for all of your efforts.
Thank you for staying up so late, Dharma. Now it's like 1:30 at your place, man.
Something like that. So I don't know if I'm being articulate at all or coherent. But
You're doing very well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
okay,
Elizabeth.